Hello, 你好. Welcome to Mandarin Mama Chitchat by Mandarin Together, where two Taiwanese moms, Trista and Yao Yao, share their experiences in raising bilingual children, exploring identity, code switching, and embracing the joys and challenges of bilingual parenting. Come along with us on this exciting journey.
Hi, welcome back. I want to take a moment and thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, learning, and growing with us. If you like our podcast, make sure you subscribe, and we would love to hear from you. If you will leave a review, we will so appreciate it. Tristan and I also have different goodies, so you make sure you check out our show notes to download our free resources. Today we have Mengsha. Mengsha, she is a mom, a scientist, and also a podcaster. She is from China. She immigrated to the United States when she was 5 years old. She's very talented, and she says she's a bookworm. So she retained a lot of reading skill from kindergarten growing up in China. So when she came to the state at 5 years old, she continued to go to Chinese school to maintain that reading level. Even though she grew up here in the US, majority of her life she is able to speak, read, and write Mandarin Chinese. Her podcast name is ABC Storytime, where her husband Sean and her read Journey to the West story and have discussion about it. We have so much fun chatting with Mengsha. She is so smart. Both Trista and I were amazed how passionate she is in Chinese language. She has a full-time job, a 2-year-old toddler, pregnant, but she is doing this podcast out of passion, and she's translating Journey to the West. And if you don't know, Journey to the West, 西游记, has 100 chapters. I love how she shared all the references from 西游记, Journey to the West, and just thinking about our culture, just thinking about the Chinese culture and the Chinese language, how it goes way, 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 way back. So it's just so cool that just the Chinese language is just so deep and so cool to learn. The words itself, like the meaning of the words, and how the society and cultural form, it really traces all the way back in the history. And you can really see a lot of reference from story like Journey to the West. We really enjoyed our conversation with Mengsha, and I hope you will too. Let's welcome Mengsha.
Hi, Mengsha. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Can you start introducing yourself? Let us know a little bit about your background. And we know you have a podcast, ABC Storytime. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I was born in China, and I came to the United States when I was 5 years old. And so I grew up here for the majority of my life. ABC Storytime is a podcast that grew out of a translating project that I have, where I am trying to read Journey to the West in the original, which is something that I grew up with watching the cartoons from the 90s and from the 60s, but I never read the real, novel of Journey to the West. And so for me, it was like a story that had a lot of impact on me as a kid, I wanted to challenge myself and try to read it, even though my Chinese is not good enough to really read it. And I think a lot of other people are in my position of, a lot of Chinese kids grow up outside of China. They can speak and they can listen, but they can't read or write. And so I think bringing those stories to people like that who maybe don't have that access can be really important for connecting to culture. And it's also just kind of a fun project for me and my husband to do together. So that's why we started the podcast, and it's been really fun.
So the idea of the podcast literally just for you wanting to I guess, trace back to your roots or just trying to like your own personal, I guess, goal? Like that was it?
That was part of it. So it started out, I also have a blog
Mm-hmm.
where I post my translation. And so it started out as just a blog. And then we decided to try to reach more people by turning it into more of a podcast.
That's awesome. Wow.
I have a question. Let's
Yeah,
go all the way back. So you said you immigrated here when you were 5.
that's right.
So 'cause my husband, we're from Taiwan, and he came here when he was 5 too, but he can't read and write. He can speak and listen. So
Mhm.
you know how to read and write. Did you go to Chinese school? How is it like at your
Yeah,
house?
so um, it's kind of a very spotty process. So when I came, I was halfway through kindergarten in China. So I actually could read when I came to the US. And my parents put me in Chinese school, the weekend one, where you just go one day a week for a couple of hours. And it was never a good fit because I could not write at all. So they could never find the right level for me where I could, like the level where I wasn't bored with reading, but I could keep up with writing. So I attended Chinese school through probably middle school. And then in high school, actually, my public high school offered Chinese classes um, from like beginner level through AP. So um, I did take the Chinese class. It was too easy for me. And then I also was a TA for the AP Chinese class in high school. And then in college, I took one semester of Chinese literature, which was taught in Chinese. And it was very challenging for me. So it was probably like a high school reading level for like a person in China. And I would just take my textbook. I would go on Zoom with my parents and hold my book up and be like, what does this say? Like I thought about getting a Chinese minor, but it was so time consuming that it wasn't worth it. Um, and so, but that really helped my Chinese a lot. And now actually, my job has an office in Wuhan. So I often am on calls with people in China and they're bilingual calls, like there's mostly in English, but there are also some times where they can't think of the English words. And so they're speaking in Chinese. I'm translating a little bit, other Chinese people on the over here are translating. People from that office who know English a little bit more fluently are translating. And so now I kind of use it a little bit more in everyday life as well.
Okay, so share a little bit about what do you do? As you mentioned, translating blog, and so just like curious, like what do you do for a living?
So my job is not related to language at all. Actually, I'm a scientist by training. And so our life science company just has a lot of our manufacturing in China because it's obviously labor is cheaper there. And also our CEO is Chinese American. And so he just started a company that had both Chinese and American offices. And so it just happened to be that I joined a company with a Chinese office. That wasn't really part of my goal at all.
Right, so podcast and translating just your personal hobby.
Yeah, that's just my hobby.
Wow, that's so cool. So does your husband speak Mandarin, or does he have any Asian background? Because you say you and him are on this project together.
Right. So my husband is Taiwanese American. He was born here, so his Chinese is not as good as mine. He also went to Chinese school, but his parents kind of gave up very early.
I can relate.
Yeah, so he was one of those kids where Chinese school just made him hate Chinese. And also with his brother as well. Yeah, it's a very common experience. And so we actually didn't speak Chinese to each other at all when we were dating and even after we were married. It was only after we had a kid that we I was very much like, oh, I want my kid to be able to speak Chinese as much as possible. And we hired a Chinese nanny So who couldn't speak English. We hired a nanny through WeChat. And so we were forced to speak Chinese at home for a year. And that's sort of what made our household a Chinese speaking household. Before that, we were purely an English speaking household. Yeah.
Wow, you just pull the plug. Just right in.
It was also cheaper, to hire a Chinese speaking nanny at the time.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say your experience is different from your husband going to Chinese school? Because I mean, it's so common, people are like, hey, I hate Chinese school. I never liked it. My parents forced me. And what is your experience like?
I think part of it is because I had that foundation from when I lived in China that it was easier for me. And so I didn't dislike it as much. But honestly, so I have two sisters who were born here, and they didn't, one of them actually lived in China for a few years when she was very little. And so she also kind of had that foundation. The other one was much more of like a classic ABC background, where she picked it up a little bit at home and through Chinese school, but did not like it. I think the main difference is that my dad loves like Chinese language. He's also an engineer, but he will like write poems in Chinese and like post them on WeChat or like essays. He's just really into like history and like Chinese language. And I think I got that love from him because he was the one when we were growing up who was like, teaching us like the idioms and the Tangshi, like the Tang poems, right? And like telling us stories from 三国演义, from the Three Kingdoms. And he was more of the one who was trying to share that love with us. And my sisters, both of them now, their Chinese is much better, but it's because as adults, they discovered C-dramas. So they would like sit down with my mom and then she would talk them through what was going on.
That's a great way to learn language, actually.
Yeah, it really is.
A great bonding experience too. I love it. So adorable.
Yeah. So, if your kids hate it growing up, don't give up hope. Maybe they'll fall into it as adults.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you say you have a kid, right? That's when you like just turn the English-speaking household into a Chinese-speaking or a bilingual household.
Right.
How old is your kid, and how do you create? I know you have a Chinese nanny, sort of with the language, but like, how do you and your husband incorporate the language and culture into everyday life, and also how, like, what's the percentage? Because you guys live in the U.S., right?
We do. We're in the Chicagoland area.
Okay. Yeah. So just like kind of walk us through how your experience, like bilingual parenting experience, has been journey.
Sure. So we had a nanny for about a year, kind of after maternity leave, and now our kid goes to daycare. So now he gets English during the day. We visit my parents once a week in the evenings, and they speak Chinese to him as much as possible. And then at home, we also try to speak Chinese to him. We speak a lot of English to each other because my husband's Chinese is not like up to complex communication, but we buy a lot of Chinese books, and that has helped a lot because I think just like encouraging a love of reading, but also just giving examples of Chinese that are not specifically how we talk, right? And so we read a lot of Chinese books at home. We listen to a lot of Chinese songs in the car. We sing a lot of Chinese songs to him. And so at home, I would say 80 to 90% of what we say to him is probably in Chinese. And then, during the day, he's in an English-speaking daycare.
That's a really high percentage, given that you mentioned your husband doesn't like.
Yeah, he's improving very fast.
That's great. Yay. We are teaching two people.
Yeah. And it's really funny watching him like learn, because he also didn't read Chinese very well. And so watching him learn to read by reading these Chinese kids books to a toddler has been, because they're great because they're so repetitive, you know, like you see the same characters over and over again. So it's a great way to learn how to read.
But I feel like it's amazing how you guys are, he doesn't really know how to read, but he's actually learning how to read, to read for your kids. How
Yeah.
many kids do you have?
Just the one so far. We've got one on the way.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So how old is the one kid that you have at the moment?
He's 2.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, okay, I have a 2-year-old as well. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And
Okay.
it's kind of funny. So like I don't know, speech delay is the right description, but she produces less vocabulary language-wise comparing to, I guess, her peers, like kids her age, but we're not too concerned just yet. But I speak Chinese to her, obviously. And so sometimes she speaks English, sometimes she speaks Chinese. And then based on my husband, so he does not speak Chinese at all. And he complained. He was like, so how do you teach a 2-year-old code switch? I was like, what are you saying? He was like, well, sometimes Iris speaks Chinese and I don't understand. It's frustrating. I was like, what is wrong with you? I just think it's really funny. I said, when you code switch, like it comes naturally when you know 2 languages or multiple languages, right? You code switch. But at the moment, obviously she's 2. That's like too big of an ask. And I think that she would like progress. This is just a phase, right? But I think it's kind of funny that, I don't know, but I take pride in it that she speaks Chinese, like half and half, or maybe slightly more than English. But she's only 2 and she doesn't speak much. So I'm not sure about your child, how much language does he or she
yeah. His Chinese is still better than his English. I don't know how long that's going to last. I'm being realistic, right? But yeah, he speaks primarily, you know how like there's these very like set strategies of like one parent, one language, or like the, you know, minority language at home. We don't do that. We just speak Chinglish at home. So it's less of a bilingual household, more of a Chinglish household. So when he comes home with English words and he mixes them into Chinese sentences, we just kind of go with it, you know?
Yep.
So like if he'll say something to me, sometimes he'll put English words into a Chinese sentence and I'll just repeat it back to him with all Chinese. Yeah. So we kind of just say like prioritize communication first, but less pressure, more modeling the Chinese. So just as much exposure as possible. And we don't really force him either way. We had a really funny moment the other day where he was pointing to like broccoli on his plate and he was like, 这是什么? And I was like, 是菜花. And he's like, oh, 菜花. Like, and I was like, how do you say 菜花 in English? 菜花英文怎么说? And he said, potato. You clearly eat broccoli at school. Like, I don't know where this mismatch is coming from.
But I feel like 2-year-old, it's amazing how, I mean, maybe he has a really high language skill because a lot of 2-year-old can't really speak yet. And there he is speaking 2 languages.
And producing it in sentence level.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, he does.
So how, like 2-year-old could be like, I don't know, like how, like 2.5, you know, like how, I don't know.
He's a November baby. So where are we at? A little under 2.5. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So I think we were on a walk and there was like a little turtle statue. He goes, 爸爸,乌龟在树底下.
Oh my gosh.
That's kind of where we're at.
That's impressive. Well, it was in November. So, yeah. No, I'm just kidding. February, what I'm talking about. She just turned 2.
Yeah, every kid is different. It's so funny. Like the code switching, like I have an Indian colleague who his husband is white and her parents watch their toddler during the day. And so he gets Bangla during the day and English in the evening with dad, and he code switches perfectly. He like even as just turned 2, he knows that like the grandparents only understand Bangla and dad only understands English. So every kid is a little bit different,
right? And they know, right? Especially when they are more proficient in the languages they speak.
Right.
It's pretty natural progression. So I'm not like too worried about. I just thought it was kind of funny that my husband was complaining about it. And I was like, why don't you learn it with her?
You should just get your husband to like take some Duolingo or something, you know?
Right, yeah. So he took like Chinese in college for a year
Mm-hmm.
or like 3 semesters for me, which is great. But then he did not do great. He did not do well,
It's
and he gave
hard.
up. He was defeated. Yeah, I know it was hard. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
definitely give him credits. But I guess he just like, oh well, I can never learn this language. It's too hard, or language is not for
Ah.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mengsha, would you say you learned most of the reading when you were in college, kind of high school, college-ish?
Um, I probably just maintained my kindergarten reading level as much as I could and then picked some more up in
See, that's
college.
maybe it's like that's your kind of like talent too, because not many kindergarten can read. You
Yeah,
know?
to be fair, I was a huge bookworm in my entire
Okay.
life.
So that kind of makes sense because 5-year-old, I don't think none of my because I have two older kids, 11 and almost 9, and they didn't read when they were in kinder at 5. Maybe like Pete and the Cat, like really simple like English.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean that's pretty impressive. You can
I
read. So it's
personally
like
think, well, we'll test this theory out when my kid is at the reading age, but I think Chinese might be easier to learn to read as a kid than English because it is purely memorization
true.
and not sounding it out. Like I think sounding it out is a lot of logic and quite hard, and English is very inconsistent, but like with Chinese characters, it's just sight words as a kid, you know?
That's true because it's like
Yeah.
memorizing, right? It's like
It's
我
memorizing and
大小 like just
exactly.
run the
And I
word.
think the way I learned to read as a kid was my parents would just read the same books to me over and over again, and I would memorize the entire book. And so I would recite the book looking at the words and then point, just go in order, you know? Like I wasn't actually reading, but you were matching the sound and you already know what it meant because you could talk to the character. And I know my son already in some of our books, he knows certain pages, what they say. So like something like 下雨了, like the page just says 下雨了. He knows that that's what that page says. And so I imagine in a year or two that he'll be able to look at those 3 characters and be like, that one is 下, that one is 雨, that one's 了. So I think that's kind of the strategy I have in my head as far as teaching him to read. Again, realistically, it depends on like how much time we have and all this stuff. But I would like to try to be able to teach him to read.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of effort from your parents. You probably are extra talented and like the language. You like
Right.
to read. You say you're a bookworm. You like to read, and your parents probably read to you when you're little.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the books that your son likes in particular? That
So, sourcing Chinese books in the US is so hard.
I know that's why I asked.
Yeah. Okay. So we bought a decent number from this website called jojolearning.com. And they ship books to the US. They're like a little bit expensive and you have to buy like a whole set at a time sometimes. But I find that the quality is pretty good. I try to find books where they're not translated from other languages into Chinese. I find that like, I don't know about Taiwanese books. I think if you're, because we read simplified, if you read traditional, maybe you have more options. But I find that mainland China doesn't come out with a lot of good kids' books. Like I was recently there and I was trying to shop for kids' books and they're all educational. And I was like, no. I want like fun stories, you know? But I try to find things that are very like native in their sentence structure. Maybe even like a little bit regional. Like I want it to sound casual. So we have one, for example, I really like 今天心情糟透了. And it's like this little kid who's like very frustrated and he's throwing a tantrum. And the parents are like, if you're going to be pounding the table, you might as well give me a back massage.
That's very humorous.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
So.
I usually when my kids were younger, I bought so many books from Taiwan because I can't, like you said, it's really hard to find books here in the US, and then with the shipping it's just so costly. So I go back and I just bring tons of books, and I feel like a lot of Taiwanese kids storybook, they're also translated like from Korea or Japan, but they'll translate
Right.
in Mandarin, right, Trista?
And sometimes they sound a little awkward or like a little too formal. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. When you say that, I can totally relate. That's why I was also curious what types of what your book resources are. Because I don't have a ton of Chinese books, and I read English books to my kids, which I want to stop. But
there's a lot more bilingual books now too available. So we've seen some at our library actually. They're not so actually. I saw one of the things you guys want to talk about is kind of the future of the podcast. And what I would really love to do is turn Journey to the West into a bilingual kids picture book, because there's so many kids Journey to the Wests available in Chinese and none in English, and especially none bilingual, because again, like a lot of parents, I know you've interviewed people like who grew up in the US whose parent, like themselves, their Chinese is not that good, but they want to raise their kids bilingual, right? Lots of parents like that who need pinyin in their books or some other kind of phonetic help in order to read a full Chinese book to their kid. And those resources are just not available. So that's kind of the dream. Right now, I would love to have like a, pinyin and simplified Chinese and English Journey to the West for kids. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought of that. That's true. There's really not like Zhuyin or Pinyin. Zhuyin is what we used in Taiwan.
Right.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
And also my husband can't, like, we try to find books with pinyin because then he can read them more easily too.
Right. And then also what I've noticed is with the limited selections already, right? I feel there are even less for traditional characters, at least in the US.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and it's hard because the US like Chinese immigrant community, we're splitting. Like we're a split audience in terms of half of us need simplified and half of us need traditional, and you have your Zhuyin, Pinyin, and that's not even counting all the Canto people too, who need their own phonetic system.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Huh. Yeah, that's a really good idea. It's a good point. Yeah. So now, share with us about your blog.
Sure.
Yeah, because you started with that first, right? And podcast came after.
Yeah. So the blog is literally just, page after page of translated Journey to the West with a lot of footnotes of like times where like I have no idea what's going on. Like I have my own English translation too as a reference, because there's so many just like religious references, there's historical references, there's like poems in that. I don't know if either of you have read Journey to the West in the original, but it is, it's like trying to read Shakespeare, right?
I was going to say, yes. I was going to ask you what version you read, like teenager version, like
no, like the OG.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
okay.
Would you say it's in classical Chinese then?
It's pretty. So Journey to the West, the language that they use is pretty casual. So a lot of it is still understandable. To a modern audience. I think like anyone growing up in China could read it pretty easily. They might not understand all the references, but they should be able to understand the plot at least, right? And but sometimes for me, like even there's stuff that like I have to Wikipedia or like like look up in my English version to see how other people have translated it before to really understand what's going on. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, Journey to the West, like what's the Chinese name? C-O-G, okay. I didn't know what you guys are talking about.
Right, everyone knows it.
Now I know.
This is something that occurred to me. I was like thinking about like preparing for this conversation, and it occurred to me that first, like, everyone knows COZ.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like, even if you never read it, you've watched the cartoon, you've watched like the live action one, you've watched like, there's so many adaptations. And it just occurred to me. So speaking from like a mainland perspective, I don't know like how you guys both grew up in Taiwan or yeah, so I don't know like what your education system is like, but one thing that occurred to me is that in China, everyone learns this, has like the same basis foundation of education in a way that in the Western world we don't. So for example, like in school, like I read Macbeth from Shakespeare and my sisters read Romeo and Juliet, but I never, like, we don't share that basis of knowledge. But a Chinese kid growing up knows COZ, they know 三国演义, they know like a handful of 唐诗 at least, right? Like all the classic Li Bai ones and the like all the 成语, right? You know your myths, you know like 嫦娥, and you know like 女娲, and so you just have all these references available to you when you're interacting with each other, and kind of people view like how easily you're able to pull these references into conversation as like a marker of how smart you are, right? They're like, wow, you can like randomly pull out this quote from like whatever. You must be so well educated. And someone who's learning Chinese in the US would never know any of those things, right? And this is actually striking me like more now when working, because my CEO is Chinese American. And so sometimes he'll start talking like in English, referencing a Chinese idiom that he's just like translated directly into English, and then he'll look at me and be like, Mengsha, do you know what I'm talking about? I have no idea. We also had like another, like an American colleague was going over to the Chinese office to give a presentation, and she was like, Mengsha, I need a quote or a poem or something that they're going to love to like help me connect with them. And I like pulled out Li Bai. I like pulled out like 灯冠阙楼 for them, and like literally taught my American colleague how to say 2 lines from that poem to start off her presentation, because that's how you connect to Chinese people, when you talk to them.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Okay, so first I want to say I love how you brought this up. So I teach Chinese at a high school here in Ohio, so we're not too far. And then when I first came here, right, I've noticed in Taiwan, I didn't understand why that was the case. I was trying to explain that to my student, but then you did a really good job explaining it. So my question, or my not confusion, but my question was, that's really bizarre. The culture different, just like for the language we use. Like in Taiwan, we use 成语 idioms with a lot of references. Like it's just so natural. We're not trying to be pretentious or show off that we're knowledgeable. It's just a language we use. It's built in, right? Everybody knows it. But here in the US, I've noticed when I say idioms, people are like, what idioms, sayings? Like people don't really use those, even though sometimes there's I cannot think of any English idioms on the top of my head, but even if there are a ton, right? But if you use it, it's kind of awkward, or like, why? Like, why are you referencing that, right? Like people would know, or can categorize as like the old people language. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And then,
yeah.
Right. So like I was trying to see why, because I mean, people would not just like start off quoting Shakespeare or any like classical novel. If they did, depends on the context, but it's just not very common.
Yeah, and I think in the US, you have a lot more kind of like people from the same generation have a set of references. So like as a kid, maybe you're referencing Disney a lot.
True.
Right? Or you're referencing now like TikToks or something.
Culture. That's pop culture.
Pop culture, exactly. But like Chinese pop culture is like this set of like texts, right? And everyone knows it, and it's cross-generational. And you know, like as a kid, as a 5-year-old, you're already expected to know 床前明月光, like because your parents teach it to you, and it's both a nursery rhyme and it's a like piece of history and it's a piece of art for adults. But you're not gonna like keep quoting Disney into your 30s.
Yeah, and then continue to quote it. Also, like when you listen to Zhou Jielun or any pop music, they reference a 龙的传人. All of these references continue to be regenerated.
Right. Yeah.
So I've noticed it makes it harder at least for foreigners try to learn Chinese because without the foundation, so we are learning pop culture right now. And then we just shoot, I can't remember what it was, but it was a song, and one of the lyrics were referencing 霸王别姬, the last concubine, I guess.
Okay.
Right? 霸王别姬 about like 四面楚歌. And I, you know, like I can tell them what it means, but I feel like I would do them a disservice by not explaining the history, right? The story. Right. But a song, there's just so many references, and it's very overwhelming if you have to like pause and here's a story, there's a story. So yeah. But I I appreciate that you did such a wonderful, clear explanation, because I try to explain to my students why, like, it's really common and normal in Taiwan and China, but I couldn't come up with a clear way of explaining to them. But you did a really good job, and I just I love it.
Yeah. And I think, like, for example, translating Journey to the West into English can kind of give people outside of China some access to that history, right? And say, you know, maybe you don't know exactly what like 火眼金睛 means, but now you have the reference point of like at least that image of where that quote comes from. We had because I like work in science, I saw this scientific paper out of China. It was like the cover of like a really good journal, right? And most people will just like put their data on the cover, like a really pretty piece of data. And they made this like painting of 三打白骨精 on the cover of a science journal, right? So this very classic story of Journey to the West as a metaphor for why it's hard to beat cancer. Because cancer is the 白骨精, the like bone spirit that keeps coming back in different forms. And so like the cover of this like international science journal is this very like obscure to everyone else reference that everyone in China knows.
That's really cool, especially connecting the literature to science. You would think science kind of its own branch, but that's pretty creative.
Yeah. But I think it's just like ingrained, like you grow up with this stuff and that's just how your brain works.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I think like the Chinese language, the history goes way back. And I think that's why there's so many.
Yeah. And we value it. I think that is something, again, like translating Journey to the West, that is just like really hitting hard for me right now, because if I grew up only learning US history in school, right? And US history goes back to what, like mid 15th century? That's when Journey to the West was written. And Journey to the West, I was translating a bit where it goes back and references 三国演义, references the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which was written 200 years before that. And you just like think about like nowadays, if I were to write something that references a text from the 1800s and I expect everyone to understand what I'm talking about, that's crazy.
Yeah. But can I just take a pause and say how amazing you are as a expecting mom with a 2-year-old working and then taking on such a huge task.
Yeah.
Well, it's going very slowly.
I feel like, yeah, you have a lot of passion, right, Trista? I mean, I can tell, like, it's not easy task to translate 西游记. Oh my gosh.
No.
You have a full-time job too. A toddler and pregnant.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Can I ask why Journey to the West among all the other like classic novels or stories?
Yeah. Well, it's the one that I grew up being the most familiar with. because I think it's the one kids get most access to. That one and Sungguo, to some extent. But Sungguo felt a lot more intimidating to me.
It's very history.
Right, exactly. And COT it helps to already know a lot of the story going in to a translation like that, because you already have some expectations for like what the text is going to say, at least. So yeah, honestly, it was just because I was very attached to the story as a child.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And then for US or English speakers, because there's Monkey King and things like that, so they have sort of understanding or introduction already too. I don't know if that was one of the factors too, but
it does help
a
to
little more
connect
familiar.
because the Monkey King has inspired so much like pop culture, you know, and people don't realize it. So it's kind of been fun in the podcast to talk about, oh yeah, and like this character, like Dragon Ball, you probably know Dragon Ball is based on COZ, and like there are all these parallels with Aang from Avatar, who is like similar to the Monkey King, and you know, all these things.
Huh. Now that you mentioned, I never associate them, like put them together, connect them together.
Yeah.
So you're a scientist, but I feel you have such a like writer or like creative mind. Not saying scientists cannot be creative. I see you like a good mix of both.
Yeah. I really enjoy it. It's nice kind of coming home after a day of thinking about science and think about something else for a while, you know?
But it's another work too. I guess for you probably doesn't feel like work, but labor of
different
love.
Kind of work. Yeah, for sure.
So where are you at translating Journey to the West?
I think I just finished chapter 10. So I'm not very far.
How many chapters are there?
There's 100.
100?
Yeah.
That's okay. 1/10.
Yeah, slowly but surely. We'll see how long it takes.
Well, maybe your son can help when he's in several years.
Then I will have succeeded, like, 100%.
Yes. You'll be a family effort.
Yeah.
The legacy carries on. Which is
When
are your parents involved?
Sorry?
Are your parents involved in this task, on this mission? Your parents?
No.
Oh,
No.
really?
They just kind of watch from afar and joke about how nerdy we sound on the podcast.
Really? I thought you were a dad at least, because you say he has a love for literature and.
Yeah, he does. I think like if I actually sort of move forward with the picture book idea, I will definitely have them proofread my script.
When you say picture book, are you talking about like a children, like not like 100 chapters, right? Like
no, so we would do just kind of so my plan would be to just do kind of 大闹天宫 as like volume 1. So like a standard size picture book, and for just like one very famous episode from Journey to the West, and then maybe we'll do like other ones as we go.
That would be very fun. Do you guys ever go back to China to visit?
We haven't brought my son yet, but me and my husband have gone with my family, and now I also have gone for work as well. So we try. I would love to, but traveling with toddlers is hard.
Yes, yeah. Do you still have family members back in China?
Yeah, extended family are still there.
Where at?
So they're in the Hunan and Hubei provinces.
Okay.
Land of the spicy food.
You like spicy food?
I do. We're slowly working on getting my son to love it too.
As a 2-year-old.
Slowly, a little bit at a time,
Right, baby steps. This is really cool. I just admire the energy that you have. Just because I've been there. I when I was expecting as a working mom, I'm still working, but with a toddler, I just feel when I come home from work, I just want to lie on the couch, but I can't because I'm forced to chase my 2-year-old around then. But the fact you still have somehow carve out time and energy to do this, and out of passion, just. And then
they're recording podcasts too.
Right? Yes, yeah. Blog and
we are
very.
There's no set schedule for the blog. The blog is just whenever I get around to it.
And we're actually your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is we are telling the story of Journey to the West in English. Me and my husband kind of narrate it together and put some voices on the characters. It's fun for us. And we also have a discussion after each storytelling episode about kind of the cultural things that stand out to us. So, we might talk about how, like, I think very early on when the Monkey King gets his name, Sun Wukong, like, we get a comment about how, like, the middle character of the family members, like the siblings' middle characters are all the same. And so we like dive into that, and my husband's family does that, and my kid is going to do that as well. With his whole family, like his family's very into it. He and his cousins all share the same middle character, and my kid and his cousins' kids are all going to share the same middle characters. Like, so that's a tradition that we keep going. And so, when things like that come up, we kind of dive into them and react to them, or things that are very strange to us as like a modern Western reader, like kind of the Taoist traditions or the Buddhist traditions that happen. We kind of have like a little discussion as well. And we're starting to bring in some more guests. Like I've had one friend on the podcast, but I would like to have kind of like the whole range of kind of people who are Western, but like Chinese adjacent, from like the people who are, I would love to have people who are more like just came from China or Taiwan react, who are much closer to culture. But I also have friends who are, say, like the white person who married into a Chinese family, like react as well. Or like people maybe who are adopted and like are fully Chinese, but like didn't grow up with any of it. So I would like to, get a lot more perspectives
Would you have
on
them
the podcast.
Would you have them to read it, or just some kind of discussion?
Just the discussion, yeah.
That would be fun. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Just like first time reading to them, or they would read beforehand and have some time to digest?
Definitely time to digest.
Okay. I just wanted to put that on the spot. Read this and tell me what you think.
Yeah. A lot of crazy stuff happens in this story that I like didn't even realize, to be honest.
Now I'm intrigued. I can't remember if I have read the original, like the OG version you're saying. I'm sure I have read the like kid version or the simpler version, but now I have to dig in and look it up.
Yeah. Or maybe find some, Chinese version, like kids versions for your kids too, because man, it's like Spider-Man. It's like Chinese kid Spider-Man.
That's so fun. Yes, that's hilarious. Chinese version. I mean, I never read them, to be honest, but I watched the movies, the cartoon, all of that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is just like a superhero story.
Yeah.
Can you share your podcast, name of your podcast? We're going to link it on our show notes, and your blog. What's the name of your blog so people can find you?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, the podcast is called ABC Storytime. We are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and then my blog is called Etymology Adventures. I'll send you guys the link so you can link it too. But that's much more of like a casual. It's both more casual and more educational, because I get a little bit more into like, hey, here's this saying, like a Chinese saying that they used back in 1580s that we still use today, or like this saying originated in Journey to the West, and here's what it means now. And some images as well of like, because I know Western readers don't have a lot of references for like, especially the Chinese myths and legends, mythological figures that appear. And so I also put a lot of images in there for readers so they can get a better understanding of like what it is they're reading about. And footnotes about like, oh, this character like is not used anymore. Like I couldn't find it in my dictionary. It just means horse now, or something. It was just the name of a famous horse. So there's lots of like little fun translating notes like that too in the blog.
Nice.
Your scientific mind definitely reflects on your blog organization, and that's well structured. That's awesome.
And I'm assuming the podcast is more for adults, right? Maybe 2D for the little ones, for kids.
Yeah, it's definitely more geared toward people who have, I wouldn't say it's like, it is a little bit deep because we don't try to simplify things the way like children's versions of COD simplify things. But yeah, the humor is a little bit more for like people who have grown up as ABCs or like, adjacent, ABC adjacent.
Well, I feel like even for like adults to listen to, and if we find something funny, and we can always like teach our kids or tell them about it. We can
Right.
translate it, children's version ourselves.
Yeah.
So I feel like we will learn a lot just from like the discussion and the story from you and your husband.
And I think a lot of people relate to the little cultural pieces that we find of like, oh, this is like what a zhuangyuan is. We've been growing up hearing that, and like,
Yeah.
why do Chinese people value education so much? Stuff like that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I guess you can find so much answers, right? From the book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Why do we study all the time? Why do they always there's like a stereotype Asian or Chinese? We have. I mean, we talk about this, Tristan. We all have to get A's. But yeah, you're right. It goes all the way back to
Yeah, the one that we're like recording now, the episode that we're like recording right now, it's like the character goes, they've like, started the examinations, the national exam, back up, and he goes and he becomes the zhuangyuan, and he like this girl like sees him from her bedroom window, and she's like, oh, he's handsome and he's the new zhuangyuan. I'm gonna marry that guy. And then he goes home and his mom is like, oh, and you've come back with a wife. Like, it's crazy. But it just feels so relatable,
Yes, I mean, even till this day, right? Like current day here in the U.S., I mean, we can still all relate.
Yeah, it's like, oh, my parents think that if I study really hard, then I'm gonna get buried. Like,
Girls now be all over you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. So fun chatting with you, and it's very impressive and inspiring. The passion you have in the
Yeah, I
Chinese
think
language.
that is really important, like in terms of raising kids to love Chinese, right? Is that like making it not just making it fun in terms of like having fun activities or like stickers and stuff like that, but really liking it. And I think that Chinese has a lot of potential for wordplay that English has too, but I think like as Chinese moms, we can really bring that into our Chinese education with our kids and just have those like little inside jokes. I think that helps incentivize the kids to speak it with us, right? Like a lot of like the casual words that we use of like the Chinese words for like belly button. Like when you're like playing with them, like tickling them, like 肚脐眼 is like such a funny word, or like
Oh, I understand what you're saying, because you like the character has a lot of meanings. That what you're saying, like the word. That's wonderful.
Yeah, but also like the way that it sounds, right? Or like, or we say, oh, I'll be like, oh, 调皮蛋儿，谁是我的调皮蛋儿, right? And if you think about what 调皮蛋儿 actually means, it's like I'm calling you a mischievous egg. Like it doesn't. And I think especially like, yeah, like your kids are old enough, I think, that they can pick up how ridiculous it sounds, right?
Yeah.
And then it's funny. And there's a lot of like bilingual humor too, where like my parents always called Philadelphia 飞来大肥鸭.
That's so funny. Yeah.
There's just like a lot of bilingual humor that can happen. Yeah.
But now that you give examples, because you said inside jokes, I was like trying to figure out. But then now that you give concrete examples, like, oh wow, like Philadelphia, that is so funny.
Yeah, right. Or we called it instead of saying like thank you at home, we say 三块油3块油喂了猫吃 like thank you very much. So we just have a lot of like little jokes.
Yeah.
I think that makes it really fun. Yeah, it makes it fun for the kids.
Right.
Today, my daughter's writing Chinese words. She's learning the word ma, horse.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the sentences is 马桶 toilet. And she's like, why does the toilet has ma, like a horse? What does that have to do with it? I'm like, I don't know. Do you guys know?
That's a good question.
I will find out for you.
Right.
Etymology.
It's like so fun.
Let's look it up.
The Chinese character is, it's actually really fun to learn. Like, it has like special meaning. Each character has special meaning. I don't know it all. I have to search it up.
Yeah. And a lot of like the more modern slang is really fun too. Like 粉丝. Right? Right? There's just like a lot of really fun, like people get really creative with this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today. It was really fun conversation. I truly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you guys for listening. If you learned from this episode and enjoyed it, would you please share with a friend and bring them into our community? Make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any updates. We would love to hear from you, so make sure you leave a review and follow us on social media. It's Mandarin Together Now on Facebook and Instagram. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.